Hey, folks, remember this?
So let me say, I have been clear. Now is the time to get a ceasefire deal and get the hostage deal done. Now is the time. And the president and I are working around the clock every day to get that ceasefire deal done and bring the hostages home.
I'm also
I'm
brainstorming a
getting
book
chills.
for when I lose.
So I respect your voices, but we are here to now talk about this race in 2024.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Remember that? How about this? You remember this?
She is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and bringing hostages home.
Some crowd there.
What do you call being
In
on
Kamala
message?
Harris, I see a leader.
She sees a leader. Okay, and not to be outdone, here's Anthony Blinken in the last 2 weeks of the administration. This is January 5th. If you remember, he kind of made the rounds doing a kind of legacy tour, and he was asked about whether he's afraid he's going to be remembered for having overseen a genocide.
Secretary Blinken worry that perhaps you have been presiding over what the world will see as a genocide?
No, it's not, first of all. Second, as to how the world sees it, I can't fully answer to that. But everyone has to look at the facts and draw their own conclusions from those facts. And my conclusions are clear.
All right. So it's pretty obvious that he got really nervous at that question and that he's lying. And now we have the proof. Biden discussed potential Israeli war crimes in Gaza. He kicked the can to Trump. Blinken was actually very worried about being prosecuted for war crimes, as were many people in the cabinet, according to this article. In the final weeks of his administration, President Joe Biden personally considered new American intelligence about Israel's devastating offensive in Gaza that prompted concerns that American and Israeli officials were violating U.S. and international law, then rejected suggestions from advisors to reduce American involvement in the war, 3 former U.S. officials told HuffPost. The intelligence reporting described Israeli officials' own view of whether their treatment of Palestinians through large-scale attacks and severe limits on humanitarian aid was illegal, 2 former officials said. Quote, this reporting probably called Israel's legal compliance with U.S. law more into question with anything we'd seen previously since the war began in October 2023, a former senior official said. Another said the material, quote, showed how aware the government of Israel was about the illegality. Lawmakers, government experts, and humanitarian groups had by then repeatedly argued to the Biden administration that Israel was violating Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act, which bars U.S. weapons for countries blocking U.S.-funded aid. Washington is the chief source of military support for Tel Aviv. But a strong motivation for urgency in addressing the new material was the suspicion it meant the Biden administration's own members could be in legal jeopardy by being aware of it and continuing to aid the Israeli campaign, 2 of the former officials said. Around this time, Secretary of State Antony Blinken raised the prospect that Israel was committing ethnic cleansing to fellow U.S. officials. A 4th official, formerly at the State Department, told HuffPost, hinting at a major crime under international law. Such language would have been a significant change in how Blinken discussed Israel, several officials said. In public, Israel and the Biden administration regularly disputed outside groups' conclusions that Israeli activities amounted to ethnic cleansing or war crimes and pointed to brutality by the Palestinian militant group Hamas. The intelligence findings were taken extremely seriously, sources told HuffPost. They gave U.S. officials evidence of specific motivations among Israeli officials, a former senior official said. Biden administration staff had been quietly discussing their own potential liability for involvement in the Gaza offensive since a month into the war. Now, State Department and USAID staff sought to make the case that with this understanding, we would knowingly be violating the law, according to the senior official. And State Department managers were, quote, not pushing back on the argument that there was very likely legal exposure based on the intelligence, but wouldn't commit, unquote. State Department lawyers told Blinken in December 2023 that Israeli conduct likely violated international law, per Reuters. Meanwhile, recommendations to trigger the 620I statute were shared with State Department leaders at least 3 times within less than a year, officials told HuffPost, including in the last week of Biden's presidency. They noted that Blinken could have said Israel was in violation of the law, but issued a special waiver to keep American weapons going to Tel Aviv. As the Biden administration fades from memory, former officials have sought recognition and plumbed new positions. Hang on one second. I'm missing one video here. Just remember to cut that. Blinken has joined the board of the Center for American Progress think tank. Jake Sullivan and Brett McGurk have positions at Harvard University and, respectively, a podcast with Vox Media and a commentator position at CNN. Few of those officials have publicly addressed detailed questions about specific decisions they made during the Gaza war. Okay, so
Imagine the Jake Sullivan podcast. Imagine what that is.
Imagine who would listen to that.
It's the only podcast where you actually look forward to the ad breaks.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, they knew, Blinken knew, and that's why he gets so nervous in that interview. He's what they're all worried that the ICC might come for them. The article deals with that there may be countries they're not able to travel to. There are certain countries that take the legal view that grave crimes against humanity can be prosecuted by anybody, that they don't need any kind of warrant. They'll arrest you if you're in their country. They're worried that that might be their future.
Of course.
But of course, the club protects their own. When you hear, and this is where, the largely right wing, unfortunately, attack on these Ivy League schools. There's some grain of truth in it, very much like the anti-woke thing. It's obscuring the bigger picture. Yes, Harvard is a breeding ground for well-connected criminals. Jeffrey Epstein had a fucking office there.
That's right.
It had an office there. My compatriot here believes we should go full USSR and turn these places into like sheep barns, which, I could definitely be talked into.
Yeah.
Here's Ro Khanna, who was definitely better than many of his peers during the Biden administration about Israel, but nowhere near where he would need to be vindicated for his behavior during that period. But like I think we're going to see from a lot of people, he's trying now. He is trying now.
To start with the truth, President Biden mishandled Gaza. He was wrong.
Huh. Yeah, it would have been awesome if you said that 3 fucking years ago.
Yeah.
Because it was pretty obvious then that he was wrong. It was obvious to us. We're a couple of schmucks. Why wasn't it obvious to you? You seem smarter than us. Why didn't you get it?
We should never have given a blank check. There were 37 Democrats who voted against the $14 billion aid to Netanyahu. That should have been every person in the Democratic caucus. Those who voted for that aid made as much of a blunder as those who supported the war in Iraq. We need to have moral clarity going forward. We need to say no military sales to Israel and Netanyahu and get on Delia Ramirez's No Bombs Act. We need to say that we will recognize what the UN, what the ICJ is recognizing, that what happened there was a genocide. We need to say very clearly that the United States should follow 150 other countries and recognize Palestinian self-determination and a Palestinian state with a secure Israel.
With a secure
Here's what
Israel.
I know.
With a secure
You may
Israel.
disagree with where I stand, but young people are tired of the platitudes. They're tired of people saying, we want peace.
Platitudes like Israel has a right to continue to exist as a apartheid ethno-state that by definition will not allow a peaceful Palestine to coexist alongside it. That has emphatically stated it will not allow that. You're not going to acknowledge the fact that the state in its current form will never allow a two-state solution. They've said as much openly, not in code, quite openly. Isn't that a platitude? Aren't you giving the kids platitudes right now, Ro?
We want justice. We want human rights. What does that mean? Where do you stand? Where do you stand specifically? Enough of the word salads, enough of the platitudes. We need to be a party of moral courage.
I have the courage to say South Africa has a right to exist, and part of South Africa should be set aside for the blacks.
Right.
It's quite moral. It's quite moral of you, Ro. So this definitely calls to mind the oft-quoted words of Omar El-Akkad. One day when it's safe, when there's no personal downside to calling a thing what it is, when it's too late to hold anyone accountable, everyone will have always been against this. I would file what you're seeing now as that. You know, what occurred to me when I was putting this together is I'm not going to say never. We've been doing this show for many years. We have very, 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 very rarely used the Huffington Post as a source because generally they just glaze the Democrats. It's like using MSNBC as a source. As a rule, it's a completely useless publication. We predicted this, many people did, that as they got some distance from the administration, they were going to try to blame Biden for all this. They were going to throw Biden under the bus. I think that's why HuffPost now would publish something like this, because whoever's thinking about running for president in 2028 does not want the Biden administration hanging around its neck. They want to be able to say, yeah, the Biden administration made a lot of mistakes. The line that Ro Khanna is pulling now. And you know what? All of the MSNBC pundits are going to spin that as brave truth telling rather than cowardly after the fact admissions for political advantage, which is exactly what it is going to be. But in that article, also, they make it quite clear Biden had these meetings where the legal people brought to him, yeah, no, they're committing genocide. And he decided to kick it to Trump. And another point that the article makes that I think is very, very important, particularly if you are post-duopoly, if you move past both the parties, it really illustrates how the sins of the Democrats empower the Republicans. Because if the Biden administration had invoked 601I, it would have made it difficult to impossible for the Trump administration to ship them arms, because now everyone is guilty of war crimes in America. Like once that was acknowledged, you could not do it. The dance that they dance, the way they get around it, is the lawyers don't commit and they don't acknowledge that that is the case. Because once you acknowledge it, that's it. You're admitting liability going forward from that. So they just do this dance where the lawyer's like, well, could be, we really don't know, in order to give them enough space to plausibly deny knowledge of war crimes. Now, if they had actually invoked it, which they could have done, the election was over. They could have done that in January.
Right.
They didn't do it.
They
didn't do it. They punted it to Trump. And what did Trump do? What did they think Trump was going to do when he came in? This
they,
is
of course,
this is where the lesser of two evils argument falls apart, because you put these guys in, and the way that they wielded their power just teed up Trump to do everything he's doing. They could have stopped him. They wouldn't do it.
Well, no, because, well, first of all, I mean, they are just. I mean, Blinken is a committed Zionist. So is Biden. And I think also to do it would have been to admit guilt and admit fault, right? Because they would have had to. I mean, you can't hamstring Donald Trump without admitting that you should have hamstrung yourself, right? And that you should have stopped sending these arms sales, right? And they weren't prepared to do that. In terms of this article, this guy here, this what's his name? Akbar Shahid Ahmed. He's the guy who wrote. I don't know if he broke all of them. I think he broke a couple of them. Remember, there was that wave of State Department resignations that happened like shortly after October 7th. He broke a lot of those stories, and I'm sure those are some of the. I would venture a guess that those are some of his sources for this as well, or some of the State Department people who he had contact with. When they resigned. And boy, do they look smart now that they got out of there, right? Because if you look now, according to this reporting, the internal conversations are that these people were all afraid that, their lives at the very least are going to be made much more difficult by the fact that they oversaw this genocide. Because, I mean, we're not party to the ICC, but a lot of countries that these guys like to go to are.
Yes.
And these are people who make a living, giving speeches at X and Y convention in this country. They work the circuit, right? So this could really fuck them up, and it should. I mean, it was just absolutely despicable. And the reporting, I think the Huffington Post. No, was it the Huffington Post or Dropsite? I think Dropsite had this one. Earlier this year, where we found out that Biden never asked Netanyahu for a ceasefire. For all this talk about how they were working tirelessly for a ceasefire. No, they were not. No, they were not. In fact, they never even asked him for one.
Right.
Never even asked him for one in all those meetings. None of it. So, excuse me. No, I mean, look, I think there's a mixture there of just like ideological commitment to Israel. We know Blinken is a diehard Zionist, and Biden has described himself that way as well. I think to a lot of these people, I think the ethos of the Biden administration is that they're just broadly speaking, there are dynamics that just cannot be changed, simply cannot be changed. Well, health insurance must run our healthcare system. Israel must run our foreign policy. It is unreasonable to think things could work any differently. That's why he never negotiated with Joe Manchin for any of the Build Back Better stuff. For all this talk about how there was this negotiation going on, no, there wasn't. Joe Biden never sat down with Joe Manchin to negotiate for any of that stuff. Remember how there was talk about, well, if we can't pass it all at once, we'll see what Manchin is willing to pass piecemeal and pass those individually one by one. When did that ever happen? Never. Never. Because there was just this deference to the status quo. Right. So you saw, a toxic ideology of Zionism and just anti-Palestinian racism combined with this just like overarching commitment to status quo politics and the idea that what is must always be. Right. And so those two things combined to, create just one of the worst horrors that we've ever seen. And yes, they teed it up for Trump. Because I think to not tee it up for Trump would have been an admission of guilt on their part. And also, they are pro-Israel. They believed in this project ultimately. Blinken certainly does. Blinken certainly does. And Biden, when he had his marbles, he did too. Who knows what Biden thinks at this point? Who knows what he was running? Jake Sullivan certainly did. All of these people. It's just horrible. And to watch those clips right now, a year later, it's just it reminds you of how hopeless everything seemed at the time, and this is why people take a flyer on Trump, because that's what you're giving them. You're just that's what you're showing them is their alternative.
That is what I always say. Trump never won an election. The Democrats lost elections. He never won an election. They were so bad that people looked at that freak show at Madison Square Garden and said, "Why not? Good enough."
Exactly.
Please clap.